Hey everyone, I think you're in for a treat. This is episode 164 of the Davidson Hang podcast, where we interview uh, interesting folks around the topics of personal development, how to level up, and healing and our healing journeys. And today, I want to introduce to you Phil Putnam, who we met through Amy and Garrett. Thank you for connecting us. When I first met you, I was like, man, like this guy, like you just have like something special, like you have like a confidence about you, someone that has really done the work, and yeah, and you have a depth too, right? Your curiosity and just the way you're able to be extremely present with people is very
Mhm.
impressive. So I'm just really excited to share, learn more about your story, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that can take away a lot from this conversation. Welcome,
Well,
Phil.
I hope so. I remember being particularly passionate about a hamburger the day that we first met. That burger was fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, and I know you just traveled as well. So, it sounds like you're an adventurer, you're a seeker. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's
and
definitely that part of me. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Oh, and yes, and you're also the VP of Sales Enablement and Notified as well. So I'm
Correct.
sure
Yeah.
there's a lot of takeaways on folks that would like to get to that VP level one day. Would love to pick your brain around career decisions as well. Sounds like you've had like a lot of experiences at like much larger organizations,
Mhm.
and so yeah, it's just so much to unpack here.
Let's get started.
Yeah, so like what drew you to sales and enablement, right? It sounds like you've been learning, you've been seeking. What is it about sales, specifically sales enablement, which I would say is like a relatively newer industry as well, right?
Yeah, I've always been a caretaker at heart, and I've always been obsessed with communication. And so those two things have really been the threads throughout everything that I've done in my career, which has been pretty varied across different industries. And then also within tech, I've done a bunch of different functions, but I've just always been somebody who was genuinely fascinated by humans and particularly adept at emotions and at caring for people and just sort of understanding the way that the inside of a human works. That's always been kind of my most natural gift. And so when my career started to form functionally around sales enablement, I was thrilled because I was like, great, I get to be a business therapist. That's the way that I looked at it. And for anyone who has seen the show Billions and the character of Wendy Rhodes, especially
Oh,
in the first couple seasons where she's like an in-house
I
performance coach,
love. Yeah.
it's obviously like a ridiculous version of this. But when I was watching that show years ago, I was like, oh my God, that job exists. I want it. So the chance to really care for a human in a business context
Mm.
is really compelling to me. And thankfully, I'm currently with a company that really believes in managing the whole person and caring for the whole person. And so, what I get to do day to day, professionally and personally, is one of the truest expressions of who I am that I've encountered in really any phase of my life so far.
Wow, that's so deep. I love what you said about the truest expression, the authentic. What I'm hearing is a lot of us were always seeking for that, like, oh man, it would be great to like be excited to go to work, right?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do we move? Let's say we're in a job that's like, okay, it pays the bills, or maybe we have a family to care for, but we want to move one step closer towards like, well, I feel like there's something else out there, but I feel very comfortable, and this helps pay my mortgage.
Sure. Well, there's one very, I think, typical answer to that question that I'll start with, which is it really does begin with knowing what you want. And I think there's a nuance to that where sometimes it can be a struggle to admit to ourselves what we want.
Hmm.
There's all kinds of things about how we view ourselves, how we view what we're capable of, and what's available to us. So that's the first piece is getting some clarity on what we want. And then also there's the risk element. And this is where it varies a lot depending upon your life circumstances, depending upon what level of privilege you have, how easy it is for you to move through the world or not.
Mm,
Also, what level of responsibility you bear in your
mm,
day-to-day life, if you have a family that relies on you. So you factor, I think, all of those things in, and then you look at the current environment around you. Because the thing
mm.
is that there's the element of timing as well. So, but it really does go back to self-knowledge. I just self-knowledge is such a gift. And first, it's a gift to yourself. And secondly, it's a gift to those you love. And third, it's a gift to the world around you that you want to contribute to.
Wow, that's deep. Well, I have a feeling that I'm sure a lot of people want to get better, right? But I feel
Mhm.
like some people are afraid to go there, like really go to the depths of their soul and really like, dig deep into like what makes them tick. And sometimes it's easier just to like forget the past and like, oh, I'm just gonna like move on from the
Yeah.
past.
Well, I have some bad news for you there. In my own personal experience, I really have found that the only way to go through something is to go through it. And I've also
Mm,
spent periods of my life trying to rewrite history, and I've learned how futile that is. In
huh,
particular, the first job that I got like royally fired from, right? Just like so fired from, back in it was like my late 20s, early 30s. I'm 43 now, about to turn 44. But back in my late 20s, early 30s, the long story short, I interview really well, but it wasn't the right fit. I didn't fully
mm,
understand what they were looking for. And it became very clear after about 10 months that I was not producing, and they let me go. And of course they did, right?
mm,
Well, after about 5 or 6 more years, I found myself in a very similar situation again. And I was at a place where I decided, okay, I really have to escalate my salary. And I can't get that at my current company, so I got to go somewhere else. And I went somewhere else. And this time I was very clear. Both sides were very clear on what we wanted.
mm.
But that changed over the months that I was getting rooted there. But when I look back, I think there was definitely a part of me that was trying to rewrite history with that second job that didn't go
Huh,
well, that I also got really fired from. Um, I was trying to rewrite the history of the first one.
huh,
And it's so tempting to try to rewrite your history. It's so tempting to believe that the path of growth is to overcome your past failures. And I
huh,
just didn't find that to be true in my own experience. I found it to be true that it's not about transcending what happened in your past, it's about integrating it into your present. And I think that trying to rewrite your own history, it's like a form of denial about where you've been and who you are. And it's,
mm.
even if it was successful, which it can't be just because, the balance of space and time, um, it's futile. It's a waste of energy. You're not going to
Huh,
change what happened. You can only harvest it for what's worthwhile to you now, and try to do the best you can in the present.
huh. It, it sounds like you're seeing a lot of us. We try to overcompensate by, let's say we were really bad at XYZ, and
Mhm.
we whether it's like we grew up with no money, so in my whole life is trying to make as much money as possible. And then once I
Yeah.
reach, let's say I make 200K a year, but then I'm feeling, why do I feel not like happy or fulfilled, right? Like I feel the same, right? Is it because um I'm trying to change, like I'm trying to overcompensate because when I grew up, my story was, oh, I think my parents weren't happy and they got a divorce. Maybe if I got more money, then I won't ever get a divorce with my wife, my family, right? Is
Yeah.
that what you're seeing?
Well, sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think here's the thing. I think the impulse and the desire to not repeat mistakes we saw previous generations make is a very good thing, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that, to take your example, staying in an unhappy marriage because of a vow you made to yourself when you were 9 years old is foolish.
Right.
So it's not necessarily trying to rewrite your history or somebody else's history, our parents' history, their parents' history. It's about trying to integrate what we've learned from them into our lives. And
Hmm.
I had a very challenging childhood as well. I will say this: my mother is probably the most remarkable provider I can imagine, but there were other really significant challenges in our lives, and I
Yeah.
had a very emotionally challenging childhood. And then also, my parents split up when I was very young, and my father was never financially supportive in any meaningful way. And
Mm.
so I grew up really, in that economically challenged place. And along with it, it was the understanding that this person doesn't care about me,
Mm.
don't care about me enough to put money on the table to help us live, right? And the way that I responded to that was not to actually pursue more money. It was to get really obsessed with people.
Ah.
And I see various responses in different people that grow up similar to how I did
Huh.
and with those challenges. And mine was to really just dive into the human relationships aspect of life. It
Mm.
helped that that was where I'm most naturally gifted as well.
Mm.
Um, and it's really become the basis of any success I've had in my career. But I still go through cycles in my life where I find myself, treating my partner the way my mom treated me
Hmm.
in ways that I don't want to perpetuate. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll go through these different cycles. I'm somebody who kind of goes in and out of therapy. I've never been in therapy like forever. I
Yeah.
probably will be going back soon again for a nice long spell of therapy. But I go through a cycle of growth. I'm like, great, I did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Problem solved. I rooted out these patterns. And then
Uh-huh.
I find myself a few years later, a few months later, doing it all again. And and I can get so discouraged sometimes. I can feel very haunted by
Huh.
the way that others have treated me. But once I really came to understand that I don't think I'll ever actually fully unroot what was planted in me. In my
Hmm.
youngest years, when I wasn't in control,
Mm.
I think my journey will be integrating it into who I've decided to become as an adult. And I'm not gonna say I'm gonna celebrate it. No, what's bad was bad, and it will
Mm.
be bad, right? You don't have to excuse the behavior of others,
Mm.
but you cannot live at war with yourself. And so that's a lot of what defines the kind of the tactics of my own personal growth journey.
I love the intentionality of the words that you use. Like there's like a grace to it, right? There's like a understanding, there's like a compassion that
Yeah.
no one's perfect. And then also like humanity, right? It's none of us have had perfect childhoods and we have all had ups and downs. And I also hear like an acceptance of, hey, like like you said, it doesn't mean it's okay, right? But it's that instead of running away from it, which I think a lot of us do, or we try to avoid it, whether it's like video games or binge eating or alcohol or weed or whatever. I'm hearing you like integration is powerful, right? Because it's like, yeah, like this is part of who I am. It doesn't define me, right? It's part of who I am, and at certain times I can choose a different path as
Mhm.
well.
I'm not saying it's easy. And it took me years to get there. It took me years and years to get there. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say is this, and I think that if you've got some crap to process through, you've got to get really comfortable with anger.
Hmm.
And I don't think our society in general has any really helpful functional narrative on anger,
Mm. Yeah.
honestly.
Huh.
But anger is a part of everybody. Rage is a part of everybody.
Huh.
And it's not necessarily something that we have to be scared of. because it's not something that has to control us. But I think it is something that every single human who's been alive longer than, I don't know, 12 minutes, probably is gonna have some anger to deal with. And that
Yeah.
was a very foreign concept for me until a few years ago, because I had
Huh.
an idea of what anger meant about somebody. Like it was a value judgment that I was making on an angry person. And I was very, very scared of dealing with anger, because I thought it meant explosions, or I thought it meant lack of control, or I thought it meant um, a very specific type of healing journey that I just wasn't interested in. And I
Hmm.
came to realize that none of that became true for me. Um, and so that's another thing I think is important to put on the table, is that not just anger, but there are some elements that are essential to healing from a rough past
Hmm.
that you got to do, and that society is not at all helpful
Huh.
with navigating. That's where you really decide, I've got to set the terms of my own journey here. You can't just kind of float along. And that's again why I'm a big proponent of therapy, because it
Hmm.
allows you to create a scenario with somebody who actually is skilled in navigating the human psyche. Um, but you get to create your own little subculture where the things that you need to focus on and the narratives you need to build to explore your healing can be built, and you can have a greater hand in that. You can't rely on the world outside of yourself for some of these things. You got to
Hmm.
create your own little bubble sometimes.
It sounds like, clearly you've done a lot of seeking and searching and exploring, and you've had, like you said, different therapists that have helped you along the way.
Mhm.
Um, Even in searching for therapy, there's a lot of different types of therapy, right? One of the most common questions that I get asked is like, well, which type of therapy would you recommend? Is it cognitive behavioral? Is it acceptance therapy? Is it Gottman's Institute, right? There's a lot of different modalities, and there's,
Mhm.
Tara Brach and all these amazing people.
Yeah.
It almost feels like we have the paradox of choice here when it comes to which therapist would I choose.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually don't have a clear answer for you on that one, because I personally am not I'm not very learned on the different modes of therapy. Uh, what I can do is describe, though, some of the different therapeutic periods I've had in my life, just by personal story. So I first went into therapy when I was 8 or 9, because that's when I manifested Tourette syndrome. So I'm neurodivergent. I have Tourette's. And for those who may not be familiar, Tourette's is a neurobiological syndrome where essentially you have an increased amount of brain activity, like electricity in your brain. You fire off all these impulses at a higher rate. Your inhibitions can't process them all, and they come out in the form of these verbal and motor tics. And why they come out in the form of these tics is really the mystery of
Mm.
Tourette. Um, Over the years of my life, there's been, the biggest advances in research and understanding what Tourette is. They now understand that it's genetic. It's in the same gene that predisposes to ADHD and OCD. Many Tourette patients also manifest, 2 or 3 of the disorders in tandem. I only have manifested Tourette's in a clinical level. The other 2 haven't really become a part of my life, at least not in a
Mm.
diagnosed way.
Yeah.
But I went into therapy when I first manifested these symptoms as a 9-year-old, because just dealing with the social challenges of being a 9-year-old who was super, super strange, like
Mm.
you're doing all these verbal and motor tics, you're gonna get viciously bullied. On
Yeah.
top of it, in hindsight, I was very clearly gay. I am gay, I'm super gay, super proud. And also I was fat. So I was like the ultimate uncool in school.
Mm.
And so therapy was really helpful with just processing through the adjustments I was going through. And then it wasn't until probably my mid 30s that I went back in and really started dealing with my parent stuff.
Mm.
In that mode, I don't know the name for it, but the technique that therapist chose to take with me that was really effective was really just giving me space to relive the emotions that I was feeling about the things that of my past I hadn't resolved.
Hmm.
And he wouldn't direct me necessarily on what to talk about. He would just let me talk. And he told me this later, much later in our time together, not at the start, but he did eventually say, you know, I deliberately take the role of a sympathetic parent.
Hmm.
It's like I made the choice in our first couple sessions that I would simply let you express all your feelings, whatever it was, and then just say, God, I'm so sorry you're feeling that. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And in that way, recast some of the things that you needed to relive from your past as a way of moving forward.
Huh.
Um, and then the third major stretch of therapy I had in my life was with a different therapist. Because unfortunately, the therapist that I just described, he passed away. And so I found another therapist I connected with.
Hmm.
And this person in particular, he barely ever talked in our sessions, which to be frank, I eventually found displeasing. I prefer a therapist who's more dialogical
Um,
and who feels comfortable suggesting advice or probing.
yeah.
Um, but I will say it really is fascinating what happens when someone just lets you talk.
Yeah.
Like this particular therapist, he really had a gift for using silence as a way to prompt me forward in what I needed to discover, what I needed to talk about. And
Huh.
as much as it would frustrate me that he would not speak very much.
Yeah.
And also, it was a deliberate approach for him. Because the thing is, like, I'm a talker, right? If you can't tell already, right? Like, I love to talk, and my mouth gets going, and I get going. And so, I think he understood that. Okay, if I just let this guy talk, he's going to take himself where he needs to go.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. It's interesting, right? Because folks of, I'm obviously like not white, right? And sometimes you look at other white people and you're like, oh, I would envy to like have that, right? From a business context or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
then, you hear people talk and then you're like, oh, okay, maybe like all these assumptions that I've made without even getting to know you at all, right, are totally wrong. And it's just, and at the end of the day, humanity, we all go through very similar emotions, right? Anger, like you said, the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
But back to what you were saying about therapy, that kind of reminded me. Just the first time I went to therapy it was very similar, where he took the place of like a sympathetic dad, and I didn't find out until later on that like he was playing that role because I didn't have a dad that spoke or showed any emotions, like didn't really talk about his feelings.
Yeah.
And looking back at it, I was like, oh, I really needed that in that moment, right? Because it was just so validating to have someone like a parent like figure. And then once I healed that, I guess I didn't necessarily need his services anymore, right? And then I went to other therapists and tried different. But EMDR kind of reminds me of what you just talked about, where in EMDR, it's kind of like hypnotherapy, but I was essentially reliving all those like traumatic moments I had, and and every session was like a different traumatic moment. But
Yeah.
in me reliving it, it actually was like, oh, the reality wasn't as bad as what I made it mean. Right. So it was interesting because I was reliving it and it was very emotional, but I was like, oh, okay. Because I was avoiding it, I actually thought it was a lot worse. But once I reprocessed it, talked about it for those 45 minutes, I was like, oh, okay, like this doesn't consume me anymore. Like it doesn't control me as much.
And
So
I mean, that's the gift of perspective. At first, when that therapist was like, we're going to relive some stuff, I'm like, no, we're not. It
yeah.
was bad enough the first time.
Yeah.
I had this idea of what, what reliving was going to be. He's like, just give it a shot, see how it goes. I'm okay, fine. And what I realized was that I think so much of the power of revisiting things from your past that still need your attention, wounds that need to be addressed, is that you're not that kid anymore, or you're not
Mm.
that 20 something anymore. If
Yeah.
it's the past, you have the opportunity to have a different perspective on it. And
Mm.
so much of it is just taking the poison out of it. just kind of letting some blood out and taking the fangs out of it. And also developing some compassion for yourself. I think I judged myself a lot for quote unquote allowing the things that happened to me to happen to me.
Hmm.
And I had to come to a full acceptance of the fact that I was a child. I was a child, and
Yeah.
I could not be responsible for most of the things that happened. You
Hmm.
know, the other thing is this: a child is not an adult. A child does not have the reasoning capabilities, the coping
Hmm.
mechanisms that an adult has. And so I think a lot of us have childhoods where we had adult level expectations and requirements put on
Hmm.
us, and we had adult level punishment when we didn't live up to that standard. But it
Hmm.
is literally fundamentally impossible for a child to behave like an adult.
Hmm.
And that expectation is fundamentally unfair. It's designed to produce failure.
Hmm.
And that failure gets used to control the child.
Hmm.
And the reason why that kind of control is felt necessary, that's the problem of the parent or the adult. It's not the problem of the child.
Hmm.
That's my perspective.
Yeah, I love what you said, right? Because like just even looking back at my childhood, I approached my dad recently, who's was absent in my life for like the last 20 years, and I was
Mhm.
like, yeah, why did you leave? Like because you just moved one day, right? And he was like, oh, you're 15, like you're an adult, like you're a grown ass man at that point, right? But I was like,
Oh my
all
God.
right, obviously I did a lot of work, so I didn't come to this
Sure, sure, sure.
like, but essentially, when he was 15, he had to escape. He escaped like the war, moved around as a refugee, went to all these different countries.
Yeah.
So in his eyes, like that was when he became a man, right? Like he literally had to live on his own and take care of his like seven younger siblings. And so I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I could see how. And but it took me a while to get there, right? But it was just like from that lens, I could see why like it made sense, right? Because I had to automatically become like an adult and take care of my mom and my sisters and stuff when I was 15. And like your point, that's unfair for any 15-year-old to have to shoulder those responsibilities and take on that burden.
Well, and I do want to pause and take a moment to say that um, I have a friend named Courtney Tucci, and one of the things she consistently says is I believe that people are truly doing the best they can. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I give that same grace to my parents. They are products of their environments. Everybody is a product of their environment.
Hmm.
And also, there were things my parents did for me and gave to me that are exceptional. There are parts of
Yeah.
who they are that are magnificent. Like, for example, both my parents are so charming in the sense like they are magnetic, they are charismatic. My mom and my dad, magnetic. He's a ringleader. He's an incredible storyteller. My mom is such a conversationalist. She loves to talk, and I love to tell this story because it ties into a lot of who I've become. But she uh, she had a profession where she just knew tons of people in our town, and so every time we would go to the grocery store when I was a kid, she'd run into somebody that she knew.
Uh,
And so whether it was 5 minutes or 90 minutes, I would stand there watching her talk to somebody. And this was literally every time,
yeah,
right? We
yeah.
went to the grocery store or most other places. And I remember being so annoyed. I just wanted to get home and like eat my Cheez-Its and watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
But in hindsight, what I was able to do in those moments, I was able to learn how to converse. I was watching somebody who genuinely enjoys conversation,
Huh.
who knows how to use language. I mean, she's
Yeah.
a brilliant woman. My mother is a brilliant woman, and
Huh.
um, that facility with people, that genuine love of conversation and love of giving information and receiving information between humans, that is like the core skill that has empowered all of the most important parts of my career. And I find it to be really a cornerstone of how I give to others.
Hmm.
And so I'm very deliberate to say the wonderful things that my parents imparted to me,
Hmm.
because it wasn't all bad. And because nobody is just one thing.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody is just one thing. And it took me a long time to get there.
Hmm.
And took me a lot of distance from them to get there. But
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for a lot of things they did for me. I really am.
I love what you just said. It reminds me of a quote that I'm sure it's from Landmark or something like that. But they said that if you're gonna accept all the bad parts of me, then you have to accept all the good parts of me as well, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it sounds like the charming, the magnet, being a great conversationalist, the magnetism. Clearly, like you were able to inherit and learn those behaviors that have clearly served you well, right, in your career.
Yeah, and that is really where we see the crossover, right, between
Yeah,
the personal life and the professional life. And actually, it has a lot to do with how I got into sales enablement. Would you like to hear that story? If
yeah,
so,
of course.
I well, so I had we'll circle back to the music career maybe later in the conversation, but earlier in my life, I had a music career. I was a singer-songwriter, and on the side, I ran a music PR firm. Just because I needed to have something that made money, whether my albums succeeded or not. And by the way, they never did. So anyway, I ended up moving to New York, bringing my PR firm with me, but that was really a gig job when it came down to it. And around 2011-ish, I was like, got to get a big boy job, got to get a big boy salary. And so I ended up going into tech. And at that time, New York City was really becoming a hub of tech startups in the world. And so I got
Yeah,
caught up in that flow.
yeah.
And that's where my career in tech really had its genesis. And so I spent most of my time in account executive world, like post sale,
Mm,
and I fell in love with project management, and then eventually, did a lot of post sale customer management as well. Again, I'm a caretaker,
mm.
right? So being a customer success manager is like a perfect fit for who I am.
Huh.
Um, and then one of the startups I'd worked with got acquired by Adobe. And so I went into Adobe, had a great run there, really loved working there.
Mm,
But while I was there, the woman who had hired me at the startup that got acquired, she also came over to Adobe and went into a senior role in their customer service organization. And she remained a champion of mine throughout our time there. So I would check in with her every once in a while. If I needed help with something, I'd check in with her as well. And then one day she called me up and she said, "Hey, I basically have this need where we need to help our customer success managers grow in this particular area that she described to me." And so she said, "We're going to do this 2-day workshop um, that every customer success manager around the world is going to take. And I think you should be the facilitator for the Americas." And so, as a special project, you'd go around to our different offices around North America and
huh.
teach this workshop roughly 25 to 30 times in about 18 months. What do you think? And I was like, well, yeah, that
Uh-huh.
sounds awesome. And I'd never done anything structured in terms of actually being like a facilitator or a teacher. And I was just scared enough by it to find it intriguing. And I think also my comfort with being on stage and being a performer helped out. But
Mm,
again, remember, I'm obsessed with people. I'm obsessed with communication. So I thought this could be a really exciting new way to care for people that I haven't done yet.
huh.
Um, but then I asked her, I said, "Hey, I'm just curious, like, we haven't talked in several months. What was it that made my name come to mind?" And she said, "I remember when I interviewed you, this was like 4 years ago at this point. When I
Huh.
interviewed you for that startup, I remember you told me that you were really passionate about enablement, about training and skills development, and stuck in my mind."
Oh, wow.
And as a little side lesson, that just really stuck with me and thought, you know what? You got to tell people what you want, and you got
Mm.
to tell them what you like, what you love. You get to cast yourself, you get to brand yourself and file yourself in a certain part of other people's minds if
Huh.
you tell them, if you
Mm.
give them the information. And if one of those people that you give that information to happens to be somebody who has the power to do something about it, at some point they might need to access that file that your name is in their brain.
Huh.
So anyway, I went and I started doing this 2-day workshop, was trained as a facilitator by exceptional people, was handed like gold medal level curriculum, like the dream scenario,
Huh.
right? And just absolutely fell in love with it. It satisfied me on a level that my music career did, which I hadn't experienced since I had shut that part of my life down.
Huh.
So I got really interested in moving my career like functionally into enablement. And that happened very shortly after that.
Wow. I think that's good advice, right? Because I do think most people give advice. Well, if you're interviewing for that role, like don't talk about other things, right? Because that might scare them. That might be like, oh, that means you're not going to stay in this role, right?
Mm.
But what you did was like actually, I'm sure most people don't do that because they've been given advice like just stick to the plan, like don't talk. So that
Well, and this is where I made a pivot around this time too, where when I talk to people about jobs, career, whatever, I actually don't talk about roles that I want anymore. I talk about what types of interactions I want to have, what type of activities I want to do, and I talk about the impact I want to make.
mm,
Because a title is a very specific container.
mm,
And if that container is not empty for the person you're talking to right now, they don't have anywhere to put you. So they're not
mm,
going to put you anywhere in their organization.
mm,
But I'll personalize it here. If I said to somebody, I'm a caretaker, I'm obsessed with communication, I love taking care of people by giving them information, I'm an exceptional coach because I'm essentially a therapist at heart. I want to listen to your people and then surface insights that I can recommend to you as business strategies.
mm,
Um, I, I love being in a classroom, and the impact I want to make is I want to first make your people feel more fully served, so that they will stay at your organization longer and they will be more productive and effective while they're there. I don't care much about winning or losing, which is really strange for a sales enablement person to say, but I don't. I'm motivated by caring for people. It makes me a great partner with revenue leaders who are very much driven by competition and by winning and losing, because together we're a perfect team to take care of the whole person, of a
huh,
seller or a sales manager. But if I say those things to somebody who has the power to do something about it, it intrigues them and it leaves room for them to think, I either have a container I can pour Phil into, I
mm,
need what he's talking about, or I want to create it for him.
mm.
And that is definitely a tactic that I recommend to people often. Is It's great to talk about roles and titles, but make sure you can also articulate what you love to do, like how you want to spend your time and the impact you want it to make.
Yeah, that's definitely a different way to think about it, right? I think most people interview for specific roles, right? But you're essentially, well, one, you're being super authentic, and that self-awareness is huge as well, right? So, I think if if you're like right out of college, for instance, like you might not even be 100% sure, but you do have an idea of like what you're possibly interested in, right? Or what you're good at, right? So that's a really good
Well, in my mind, sorry to interrupt, but I did. um, in my mind, this is just the way that I choose to think about it. because you're right, a specific role, a job description, that is almost always the entry point to an interview process, right? Or to seeking what the next step is. What's the next contribution you're going to make? What's the next thing you're going to do to take care of yourself and your family? It's almost always defined like that. Not always, but almost always.
Yeah.
However, in my mind, two things. First of all, I'm actually interviewing for any job they might want to put me in. What's going on behind the scenes. But what I do is that all the recruiters that work in a talent acquisition team together talk to each other.
Right.
And so if I'm talking to Jeanette, who's just random, I'm just making up a name, talking to Jeanette, and she's a recruiter for the role that I'm talking to her about. And what she discovers is that I'm not the right fit for her job rec. But she goes to John and she's like, John, I just talked to Phil. I think he's your guy. Could be interviewing for 9 jobs at one time. And then the other thing is that I'm also deciding if I want to be a part of what they're doing.
Right.
Not just me trying to fit into that container that they're offering.
Yeah.
It's trying to figure out if that's a container I want to be in. And so that's why I talk a lot about myself in interviews, because that's really what they want to know. You know, I talk about what I love. I talk about what they could expect from me. I talk about how to behave in a professional environment. I try to give them a picture of what it might be like to have me on their team. And I also make sure I talk about, this is the kind of impact that you're likely to get from me. So they can decide if that's what they need.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually. I think especially younger folks that are more junior in their career, they're always trying to answer the questions, right? But sometimes they don't ask as many questions, or they're not interviewing the company, right? I think as we progress in our career, we know from our mistakes, right? Maybe we're just trying to fit their mold of whatever they're trying. We're almost trying to adapt, and in some ways, I'm sure, there's been times I've been guilty of it, where I'm like, oh, it sounds like this person, or you ask around like, oh, what's the hiring manager like, right? And they're like, oh yeah, they're results oriented, they care about XYZ, and then you're like, oh crap, I guess I gotta I gotta make sure I get to answer my questions in those through that lens, you know.
Well, yeah. And here's the other thing I gotta say. I'm always very mindful of the environment that I'm putting advice out into. I'm also very mindful of my privilege profile. I want to kind of dig into both those statements. The first thing is that we don't always have the freedom to be super picky, right? Like in the environment we're in right now, we're seeing layoffs at the world's biggest companies and the world's smallest companies, right? And so the market's contracting. And so I want to be mindful that the advice I'm giving, you have to put it in context. And there are times when you might need to take a job that is available to you because it's what you need.
Right.
If that's the case, just know it's probably not going to be forever. Most people in the world today don't work at the same company their entire lives.
Yeah.
The other thing about privilege profile is this, and I'll just describe my privilege profile. White, male, educated, fit, gray hair, charismatic, right? Grew up poor, but I've become financially comfortable. So other than being openly gay, I am among probably the highest levels of privilege profile right now. Not right now, but I meant to say right.
And born in the US as well, right? I think that's
right. So I believe it's my responsibility to acknowledge the fact that not everybody has the freedom to control that conversation the way that I might. It's also why I am particularly passionate and active in using the ease that I have in moving through the world to say the things that need to be said, because I know that they will probably come at a lower potential cost for me because of my level of privilege. And because I've been able to earn my place at a higher level of work, it gives me more freedom to influence things, to actually create change. So I made this decision about a year and a half ago. I just was not going to work scared anymore. And that was a big change for me. I'm mouthy, but I'm not necessarily bold. I've been mouthy my whole life, but I've been scared most of it. And I
Yeah.
decided, you know what, I'm going to pair boldness with this. I'm just not going to work scared.
Hmm.
And thankfully, I work in an environment and with a company that I don't need to work scared.
Hmm.
I'm so deeply proud to work at Notified. Um, I am so deeply proud of the actual diversity we have in all layers of leadership. I'm proud to be part of a sales organization that allows me to care for people the way that we care for people here. And
Hmm.
we're nowhere near perfect. No organization is. We're
Right.
solving our problems, we're making mistakes and fixing them, right? Just like any organization that's run by humans is. But I just want to say I am genuinely proud to be a
Huh.
part of the company that I'm a part of because they are open to me not working scared and to me saying the things that need to be said.
Well, so much to ask you about that. So
Mhm.
I I mean clearly you know like you've done the work, right? So half of me thinks like, well, is it just because like you've done a lot of work and you have a lot of self-awareness, so your level of appreciation and gratitude and just the understanding of societal stuff, or is it your company is actually like, well, it's probably 50-50, right? I think it's some of it, it's like our perception, right? It's like clearly you're pretty understanding of a lot of different circumstances, so you have a lot of compassion. And I think part of it is as well, like you probably did a lot of research, right? Like you spoke to a lot of people while interviewing. Like you certainly, I'm sure you checked out Glassdoor, you asked around. How were you able to land, because I think many of us are seeking that like that
Sure.
that home, right? That like where I could put in, at least more than a handful of years and to
Yeah, I would say this. There's a limited amount of information you can get about a company before you choose to become a part of it, right? There's only so much you're going to see from the outside. So you got to make a judgment call. I had no idea how good it was going to be. What I did know is that the person who's my boss, we had fantastic chemistry from the first conversation.
Hmm.
Um, and everybody else I interviewed with along the process, it was very similar. The ideological alignment was there, the personality alignment was there. Also, I was very comfortable in the ways that we were different,
Hmm.
and I was very encouraged by them not looking to hire versions of themselves. They were looking for something
Hmm.
they didn't have. Um, that's what I would say about the company side of it. What I would say about my side of it, or to apply it to the listeners, to your side of it, if you're the one interviewing or looking for a place to contribute, is that uh, self-knowledge again is going to be your number one help here. And
Yeah.
you got to trust your instincts. I have been in situations where I went against my instincts and I thought, no, I don't have chemistry with this person who's going to be my hiring manager. It always becomes true. It always
Hmm.
becomes your reality. Um, and now sometimes that reality is totally functional and totally livable and it's not that bad. And sometimes it's a nightmare. Um, so I do have to say, I don't necessarily think that the journey of employment is defined by looking for the most ideal situation. I
Hmm.
think if you find a place you love to work and you can be who you are, that's an amazing find.
Hmm.
Ride it for as long as you can. But I also
Yeah.
think that it's not necessarily a failure on anyone's part, on your part, if you spend some time in organizations that are a good fit for you rather than a
Hmm.
great fit. Yeah.
So much wisdom there. Wow. I feel like we could talk for hours. I love what you said about because I think many of us, I mean, I'm certainly guilty of this, like, are seeking that like perfect company. Like, I did as much research as possible, probably 500 hours of just searching, like looking at every Glassdoor review and doing all these different things. And I love what you just said, right? Because it if we're always seeking for perfection, like we're not gonna find it, right? But what you said is just so wise, and it sounds like you're able to just be authentic and be yourself, and that's even more important than seeking something like looking externally versus like being comfortable and really accepting ourselves, like our internal
Okay, so
self.
I promised a music career story earlier. So this is where I'll pay that off, because one of my albums I wrote was called Best of Intentions. And this is back when I was in my mid-20s. It really became an exploration of perfectionism. And it because I was totally an approval addict. For up until probably my mid to late 20s, I really based my sense of my own self-worth on the input I would get externally from others. So I was always
Mm,
chasing people's approval, trying to make sure they liked me, they saw value in me, because I wasn't settled on my own value in myself,
mm,
uh, amidst the things I couldn't control outside of myself. So this record that I wrote and made over about an 18-month period was really the journey of settling a lot of those things for myself. And in that process, I contended with perfectionism. And
mm,
I came to my point of view on not just what perfection is, but if it's desirable or not.
mm,
And what I came to believe and still believe about perfection is that, first of all, it's not real. It's not possible. But secondly, even if it was, it would be so boring, because perfection would mean that in any situation, a perfect person would behave in the exact way that is perfect for that situation,
mm.
which means they would behave the exact same way every time they were in that situation or any situation.
Wow.
It is perfection becomes the dissolution of individuality. It becomes
Huh.
the dissolution of creativity and authenticity, and that texture, that very texture, that surprise that comes from being human and interacting with other humans. Perfection is uniformity
Wow.
in my mind. Um, and so that's why I have zero interest in perfection, because first of all, I just believe it's a lie. It's just not real. And I believe it's a waste of energy. And I believe that it's not even a desirable outcome if it was possible.
Hmm. Wow, that's deep, man. That's yeah, I feel like we can go for hours, but yeah, I mean I love what you just said, right? The just like embracing our individuality instead of trying to be something, and probably spending too much energy, right? Trying to be something that we're not, right? I think yes, like we can strive for excellence, right? But if it becomes paralyzing, if it becomes overthinking, then then long term that's just not sustainable.
Well, yeah, and this is one of the probably one of the most important things I could say here in this conversation, and I'll couch it in a personal story too. Um, I know I talked about my parents earlier. I talked about challenges. I talked about wonderful parts of them.
Mm,
I've chosen not to interact with my parents anymore, um, because I don't feel emotionally safe with them. Now, I don't feel comfortable speaking for them in any format, including this format. So I'm just making that statement for myself. Um, but the reason why I share that is because, um, for anybody who wants to truly grow, you have to become self-possessed.
mm,
And you have to become comfortable making the decisions that are right for you, even against the waves of sentimentality that might surround the things you need to do. Like, choosing to not interact with your own parents. There's no narrative in society that's broadly broadcast that supports that, right? That is a journey you take on your own, and you
Yeah.
can encounter sympathetic people along the way, but you got to be a little bit savage about it, right?
Right.
And so if I look at my journey, I went from being somebody in my youth that was deeply self-consumed, not selfish, but self-consumed,
Hmm.
by and really driven by my need for approval to make myself feel worthy, to self-possession,
Huh.
which is, I know who I am. I'm comfortable making the boundaries I need to make for my own health. And I really have become focused, and I define my life based upon what I want to offer, what I want to contribute. And I do it on the terms that I've decided for myself, in terms of not logistically. I mean, no one's completely in control of their life logistically. Also, I love working at a company. Like, I don't want to start my own company, right? I'm what I call a house cat. I love working in-house somewhere. That's where you get the best of me. But when I say on my own terms, what I mean is, for example, like, I I am better, I am safer, I'm honoring what I believe is necessary for me by making some tough choices in my family life.
Hmm.
And I'm at peace with that. I'm at peace with that. Took
That.
a little time to get there, but I'm there.
Wow. What that's a good place to wrap up. Yeah, I this has been one of my favorite episodes so far, right? Just the level of wisdom and insights, and just a level of depth that you have, just not only like at a societal level, right, at the community level, right, but especially the inner work that you've done to really just step into your power and step into and just being comfortable with who you are. I think that's a beautiful message.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Phil.
I really hope I've given you and the listeners and viewers things of value. I really hope that. Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. We'll have you back sometime. I feel like
I
there's
love
so
it.
many other so many other topics I would love to
Maybe on
explore with you.
episode 264, you know?
Yes, that's a good down.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil. Take care.
Good day. Bye.